Our theme for the month of December, I still have to remember, we're in December now, is Many Faiths, One Family. And it's a theme that many centers are using throughout our denomination. We're going to be taking a look at the holy days that occur in various faith traditions. This time of year, as you probably are aware, there are many of them. So this week we're going to be talking about Rohatsu, which is a Buddhist holy day, and I'll explain more in a few moments. Next week is the winter solstice, which is a pagan tradition going way back. The next week will be Hanukkah, and then Christmas, and then Kwanzaa. Last month, I spoke about my visit to Shasta Abbey near Mount Shasta, the Zen Buddhist monastery. And I talked about this delightful monk named Reverend Jisho, who gave Vivian and I a tour, and he was just so humble and sweet and talked the whole time about his Buddhist teachings and philosophy, not in a preachy way, but just in a sweet way. And I mentioned then that he told a story that really struck me and that I would be basing a talk on it later on. So I want to tell you that story from Reverend Jisho this morning. I don't know that this is a true story. I haven't been able to fact check it, but like many stories, it's a great teaching story, even if it didn't actually happen. So it involves an SS officer based in the south of Germany in a camp during World War II. He is in charge of meting out punishment to those who have been accused of espionage. So he brings the men individually into his office, and behind his office desk are two doors, two black doors. He explains to the condemned men that behind the one door is a firing squad, and that as they walk through, they will meet their death by firing squad. Behind the second door is a different choice, and he is not at liberty to tell them anything more about what that choice is. Now, which door do you suppose most people chose? The firing squad, because it was known, right? They knew they were in trouble. they were spies, and rather than choose the unknown and the possibility of something better, they chose the firing squad. What they didn't know was that behind that second door, there was a car with the motor revving, ready to whisk them off safely across the border to Switzerland to their freedom. Now, as the story goes, at the end of the war, this SS officer was not prosecuted as a criminal, a war criminal, because he had offered them the chance at freedom. So the door to the unknown is my talk title this morning. That story captivated me. I'm not sure why. But in Buddhism, the idea of this door of the unknown is quite significant. To study Buddhism, Reverend Jisho told us, is to study oneself, to go deeply into those unknown aspects of ourselves, to understand ourselves better, but then to release the self with the small s, so that we might become enlightened, understanding we are part of the whole of life. So Buddhist practice calls us to be in meditation, to look deeply, to examine our fears, our angers, envy, all our insecurities, to understand them in order to release them, and to change our habits that may not be serving us. But we have to risk changing ourselves. We have to risk going beyond the familiar in order to do that. If we're not willing to pass through that door to the unknown, in some ways, it can be like facing that firing squad, because we're killing off the possibilities of something better, of something new, of life as it was meant to be for us, returning to our old habits that do not serve us. And according to the Buddhist belief, we are thereby choosing to return again on the wheel of samsara, being reborn in another lifetime with the same old harmful habits and having to deal with them again. So I'm wondering this week in our lives how many times each of us has settled for the proverbial door number one. The known choice, and perhaps not the highest and best choice, but the more comfortable, because at least it's familiar. And it does take courage to walk through that door. And we could be talking about habits. We could be talking about our relationships, some of which may no longer serve us, at least in their present form. We could be talking about the work we do that may not be the right work for us. We could be talking about addictions. Having the willingness to choose a different path, to try something new, to open that door to the unknown. It's not always easy. It takes courage, and it can be met with difficulty at first, for sure. And it's a great time of year, I think, to do this practice, to look into the past year and to kind of evaluate what was wonderful, what served us, and where might we be called to walk through a door into the unknown in any given area of our lives. Our founder of Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes, says, "The only way God can evolve a spontaneous individual is to let him alone and allow him to awaken to himself. Behold, I stand at the door and knock." Rahatsu in Japanese simply means the 8th of December. Now, this has significance in Buddhism because it's the day that we're told the Buddha became enlightened, sitting under the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. December 1st through the 8th, for 8 days, or I guess that's 9 days, he sat under that tree, and as the story goes, he did not move. He was determined to get to the truth of what human suffering was and how we might, divest ourselves of it. Now, during those 8 days, the story also goes that he was visited by all of his shadow aspects. He had to take a look at all of them. There was another god, I've forgotten his name, that kept sending slings and arrows to remind him of his shadow. And at that point, Siddhartha Gautama was enlightened enough that he met every single one with compassion and with surrender. And so when those shadow ideas hit him, the story goes, they turned to flowers. And when he awoke when the morning star came up on that 8th day, there was a bouquet of flowers around him. Interesting enough, the last shadow that the God made him look at was doubt and self-doubt, which is an interesting one because I think it's an issue that we all deal with. Now, during this holiday of Rahatsu, from December 1st through December 8th, starting today, Buddhist monks around the world sit in contemplative practice. They do a contemplative retreat, reflecting on the final reckoning of the practices that they've engaged in this year. It's a beautiful practice. They literally stand at the door and knock. They are willing to listen and to reevaluate what they've been doing. The meditation retreat is called the Rahatsu Session. Session is spelled Sessin, and that word in Japanese, I love the meaning. It means touch the heart-mind. The heart-mind, not up here, not in our anxieties and our fears and our trying to solve things, but down here in the heart-mind, where we might proceed with compassion, releasing anger, fear, greed, envy, and all those things, so that we might know our oneness and the goodness of the divine that surrounds us. Now, as luck would have it, and of course it's not luck, it's probably spirit, I would say. Early this morning, I was having trouble sleeping, and I put on a podcast by the Buddhist author and teacher, Tara Brach. Some of you probably know her. And wouldn't you know it, that 2 of the stories she told were like, wow, that's exactly what I'm talking about today. I love the way that works. So I wanted to share a couple of these with you. And I think that they speak to, growing up, many of us are told what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what we should be, what we shouldn't be. Many of it's well-meaning. I mean, we're learning the mores of our culture, but some of it is limiting. And very often we carry around those limited ideas forever in our heads. And our identities are very narrowly defined, where we're not open to something more, something new. So the first story is about a young mom driving in her car with her 3 children on a balmy evening in the summertime. And there's a convertible ahead of them. And suddenly, out of the blue, a woman in the convertible stands up and waves to the children, and she is stark naked. And the mother's a little bit of aghast. And from the back seat comes her 5-year-old's comment, "Mommy, that woman is not wearing a seatbelt." I love that story because our rules change as we get older, but what we're taught to focus on sometimes isn't really the point, right? Out of the mouth of babes. Now, the other story is also applicable. It involves a Protestant man who moved into a neighborhood where it was predominantly Catholics. And they were kind to him and accepting of him. But one Friday night, he is grilling a steak on his grill, and the windows are all open because it's summertime, and the neighbors are a little bit upset. So they go over to talk to him. Now, mind you, this is not the way it works to convert to Catholicism, because I did that one time in my spiritual journey. But for the sake of a story, it's a good story. So he decides he'll become a Catholic after a long conversation with his neighbors. He goes to Mass the following Sunday. The priest blesses him with holy water, and he says, "You were born a Protestant, you were raised a Protestant, but now you are a Catholic." All is good until the next Friday night, when this guy is out in his yard grilling a piece of meat again. And the neighbors go over, and before they say anything, they notice that he's pouring ketchup on the meat on the grill, and he's saying to the grill, "You were born a cow, you were raised a cow, but now you are a fish." You know, sometimes we don't change our ways that easily, right? I mean, I love that Reverend Linda last week talked about the alchemy of gratitude. But, you know, when we want to change a habit or our identity, it takes courage to walk through that door to something new, and it takes persistence, yes? And it takes contemplation to reflect on how we got to be the way we were, what are the reasons behind those old habits, and what do we need to do to form a new habit. Again, Ernest Holmes said in the Science of Mind textbook, "Man's self-knowing mind is his unity with the whole, his perception of reality with a capital R. This unity with God on the conscious side of life is the guarantee that man is a center of God consciousness, that he is some part of the consciousness of God." Wow. So this is really what enlightenment is about. The dictionary defines it as a state of attaining or having attained spiritual knowledge or insight. I would go a bit further, and I would say in our philosophy, enlightenment really means to have that Christ consciousness or that Buddha consciousness, that consciousness that we're all one, and that love is truly the essence of who we are, that we're called to be compassionate, non-judgmental of ourselves and of others. Now, I thought it was interesting as I thought about my talk title that Buddhism wouldn't exist without the willingness of one man to walk through that door to the unknown. The man who became known as Buddha was born Prince Siddhartha Gautama, a very, very wealthy family in what is now modern-day Nepal, somewhere around the 6th century BC. There's some arguments about when that was. And Prince Siddhartha's father kept him under his wing. First of all, his mom died, so the story goes, when he was about 6 weeks old. I got to get my notes, get this straight. And so the dad was raising him. His mother died 7 days after giving birth to him, probably from complications of birth, right? Dad wanted to protect Siddhartha. So he kept him very, very lavished with servants, and he had a castle of his own, a palace of his own, where he was insulated. He was not allowed to go outside the palace doors. Siddhartha married, the legend has it, at the age of 16, and soon thereafter had a son. And for 13 more years, he continued with worldly seclusion as his way of life. When he reached adulthood, though, he had little experience of the outside world, and he was curious. So he snuck out with one of his charioteers outside the palace walls to see what was going on. The first thing he saw was a very old man, and he had never been exposed to this. Thereafter, he told the charioteer to take him out several more times. And the things he saw, he had a lot of questions, and he wanted to see it. He saw a diseased man, a decaying corpse, and a religious man, an ascetic. And the charioteer, upon questioning, told Siddhartha that this man had renounced the world to seek release from the human fear of death and suffering. Siddhartha didn't even know there was such a thing as death and suffering at this point. So overcome by these sights, the story goes, the very next day after seeing all this, he left the castle. He left his wife, he left his child, and he began a very ascetic life of meditating and fasting. He drew to him 5 other ascetics who were really impressed by his commitment to this life without physical pleasure. But it wasn't really working for Siddhartha. He kept wanting to know truth and the cause of suffering and what could be done about it and how he might alleviate it. So he redoubled his efforts, enduring pain and fasting and physical deprivation. Whatever he tried, it didn't work. Then one day, a young woman offered him a bowl of rice, and he decided to accept it. He ate the rice, and he decided then and there that this austere life of corporal deprivation wasn't the means to achieving what he wanted, liberation. And so he ate the rice, he bathed in the river, and he drank water. Now the ascetics abandoned him because what they loved about him was that he was so committed to this way of life, and they said, oh, now you're going to go do what feels good, aha. That night, Siddhartha sat alone under the Bodhi tree, vowing not to get up until the truths he was seeking became evident. He meditated for several days, purifying his mind, seeing his entire life as I spoke about before, all of his shadow sides and what was going on, his previous lives, all of that came up. And soon a picture began to form in his mind of all that had occurred in the universe. Siddhartha finally saw the answer to the question of suffering that he had been seeking for so many years. In that moment of pure enlightenment, he became the Buddha. For many years after that, he's a teacher. He forms sanghas, communities, spiritual communities. What was really cool about the sanghas is that they included women. They had no barriers to class or caste or sex or previous backgrounds. That was all ignored. They came together to study. Of course, his dharma, his teachings in Buddhism consist mostly of the Four Noble Truths, which have to do with suffering, the cause of suffering, and how we can alleviate suffering. And then the Eightfold Path, which basically are, right speech, right habits, right words, and so on. And it has to do with moral conduct. It has to do with meditation and allowing, the truth to be revealed to us. Buddha died around the age of 80. When he died, it said he told his disciples that they should follow no leader, but be your own light. I love that. And if you think about it, today an estimated 350 million people across the world adhere to Buddhist beliefs and practices, all because one man had the courage to walk through that door to the unknown and to pursue whatever was brought to his attention that he needed to pursue. Now, I would say that through our ongoing study of science and mind principles, through meditation and prayer, we attain spiritual knowledge and insight. But the trick is, nobody can do this for us, right? We have to do it for ourselves. So my encouragement this week is to practice your practice. Start where you are. Many of you are meditators, I'm sure. But whether it's 5 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour every day or twice a day, let's be consistent. Looking within. All our answers within. We teach that all the time, right? But how are we going to hear them if we don't take the time to look within? Another phrase that stands out for me from that podcast this morning with Tara Brach was that illusion, in order to dissolve illusion, we have to be willing to examine, to investigate. And sometimes that investigation means an investigation of our inner world. December 1st to 8, spent in deep samadhi, deep thought. That's what Buddha did. And when that morning star's brightness on the 8th day caused him to cry, it filled him with wonder and perfect enlightenment. And I'd say each moment is really, yes, we can sit in quiet, but we can also practice the principles of compassion and knowing our oneness with people, no matter where we are, at the supermarket, on the freeway, anywhere we are, we can do this every day. Let's be the one willing to open the door to the unknown, who imagines new possibilities and brings them into conversation, into our thoughts and into existence, because we know that's how it works. When we focus on it, we allow it to happen. Be the one who sees opportunity, walking into the unknown and making it known. I want to close with a couple other ideas I heard from Tara this morning. She talked about universal conditioning and how that happens. Conditioning to have certain rigid beliefs or our identities. There are 3 main ways. She said we have, as humans, what she calls a negativity bias. In other words, anybody feel like you have a tendency to focus on problems instead of the good? I mean, all last week, Reverend Linda talked about the power of gratitude, and I think everyone in this room understands that. But let's face it. If I'm given a compliment, sometimes it's like Teflon. I take it in, and then when I get a criticism, it's more like Velcro. it sticks, right? And I think that's true of, our problems versus our bliss. Oftentimes, we just have a proclivity to focus on what's wrong with us or with life in general. The other thing she talked about that is a factor in our universal conditioning is that we have a tendency as humans to sort for differences. In other words, I'm very aware of people that are different in whatever category that is. And somehow, maybe this was in the old days, whenever they were, a method of helping us survive, because another tribe might not have been able to be trustworthy. But we do tend to sort, to notice differences, both from others and from within ourselves. If we're being different than we were told we should be, something comes up in us and we get uncomfortable. So we have to get past that. We have to get past that to know that we're all one, even though we may look different or act different or believe different things. And we also have to get past this circumscribed, narrow view of what we are supposed to be, that we can be different, that we can be new, that we can be expansive. And then the last thing she talked about that conditions us is actually a genetic factor. And this was interesting. I hadn't heard this before. A genetic conditioning for anxiety. There is, I guess it's a chemical, maybe a neurochemical in our brain called anandadine. Now, those of you who know Sanskrit know that the word ananda means bliss. Walter blissed us this morning. Ananda means bliss. Anandadine is a chemical that reduces anxiety. But genetically, only 30% of us are set up to have that, meaning 70% of us are kind of predisposed to experience anxiety. And what I'm knowing is one of the best antidotes to anxiety is spiritual study, meditation, prayer, being in spiritual community, seeing a practitioner, listening to a podcast, right? We almost need to take steps through that door to the unknown to undo the conditioning or remove the effects of that conditioning. Taking a fresh look, because really we have that conditioning that adds to the anxiety from the media, from our culture. It's just kind of in our genes. So this week, I'm going to end with this quote from Ernest Holmes, which I love. He said, "The hour of freedom has struck. The bell of liberty is ringing. And let him that is athirst come. Let us then plunge more deeply into our own natures and into the nature of the universe and see if we shall not find treasures undreamed of, possibilities never imagined, and opportunities which the fond thought, yearning for freedom, has often in our vision of the greater life given us. Ask and it is given. Knock and the door will be open. Stand at the door and knock. Let's do that as we look back upon this past year, what we're grateful for, what has served us, and what maybe needs to shift. What is that door to the unknown that's calling to us to open? And then let's be willing to walk with each other. If there are difficult feelings that come up, crises in faith that come up, we have a Sangha here. We have a spiritual community. We have practitioners and ministers and fellow congregants that can support us in taking a look at those shadows, in reaching for a new possibility, a greater possibility, whether it's in our health, our spiritual practices, our relationships, our work, or just how we spend our days. The door to the unknown just might lead to freedom, like that story in Germany. Let's go into prayer. On this Thanksgiving weekend, as we enter this season of holy days, what a great opportunity it is, as Maggie's prayer and meditation urged us this morning, to get quiet. As the animals hibernate, the seeds lay dormant for now, we're called to go within. We're called to remember that there's one presence and power permeating all of life, orchestrating all of life in beautiful synchronicity, in perfect order. It is a power that is generous beyond our imagining, a power that loves us, supports us, lifts us, guides us, if we're willing to listen. And so I affirm for each of us as we close out the year in this wonderful month of holy days and celebrating and family, to remember to include those who are less fortunate in our prayers, in our giving, to remember to spend time in quiet despite the busyness of holiday preparations, to have the courage to spend time evaluating what might be the doors to the unknown that so far we have not peeked through. What might they be? And how might we open them? And how might we get support to truly take a step into a new, expansive life, the life that we are each born and created to be and to express. So I say a word of blessing for each one here, for each one who cannot be here today. And as always, I bless those across the globe this day and during these holy days who worship no matter what their beliefs and what their venues, in a mosque, a temple, in a yoga mat, an ashram, out in nature. We are one. We are one. And if we tune into that heart-mind, having our own Rohatsu session, I know that we are enlarged and lifted and blessed, and we become a blessing to one another. So in great gratitude for this beautiful practice of Buddhism, for this brave Prince Siddhartha, the Buddha, for all teachers and master teachers, and for each one here who knows the truth in the depths of our own heart, answers right within. I just release these words now, knowing that they are heard and answered as all prayers are. And we say together, and so it is. Amen. Thank you.